So we're starting off with a conversation about performing arts, and today we've got Scott and Gabi and Daniel joining us, so welcome. I want to hear from each of you. So for those who may not know any of these people, Scott is a playwright and an actor. Many of us were lucky enough to experience Hillsong Boy, which was a one-person show that Scott put on in the last couple of years. Gabi is a creative writer and a poet and a songwriter. We have been very blessed by some of their amazing works. And Daniel does a fair bit of improv in his life, and he's a writer as well. He's completing a book at the moment. So this is going to be really interesting. All right. I want to start with you, Daniel. Tell me about, in your words, your engagement with performing arts in your own life and what drew you to the things that you're involved in performing arts.
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure that, there was a moment of decision or some revelation that I should, do improv or, for example, or even write, but that I had this compulsion to create and, the muse. And I think that, so many of us have that, it's innate. And I guess I had the advantage of being encouraged and supported by very enthusiastic parents who never told me, oh, you mustn't do that. I did a lot of stand-up comedy in my first couple of years of uni, and again, that was something that, had I been discouraged, from a young age, I would probably never have dreamed to have done. So I'm sure that for everyone in this room, talent is innate. I think it was Fran Lebowitz who said it's the most democratic thing in the universe because it's just randomly scattered around the population. You can't, I don't know that you can develop talent per se. I think you can cultivate a craft, but I think you're just born with this gift. I'm not unique in that way. So when I realized that I had something to say, and I think also as a queer person, when I realized how at odds my experience was with, the mainstream, I had no choice. I had no choice. And I think you either speak or you die, right? You have this compulsion to assert your place in the world. And so I honoured that, and I try to continue to do that.
So some of your creativity is manifest in your writing, which is really exciting, but some of your creativity is also manifest on stage, in improv and in stand-up comedy and stuff. For you, what's the difference in how your creativity manifests in those two kind of areas?
Well, improv is just nonsense, I mean, you learn, they give you a few principles. Has anyone ever done improv?
Yeah. People? Yep.
Too scared.
Yeah, it's good fun.
Too scared? Okay, that's fine.
Scott, you haven't?
Yeah.
You
Yeah. Of course.
Old hand. Musical improv?
Yeah.
Right, interesting.
Feels very different to comedy improv.
Okay.
Okay. For me, I would say something and want to be serious at the Shakespeare Festival in Year 9, and everyone would laugh. And so I thought, well, this could be the beginning of something, I suppose. And if you're asking how they're different, Rads, I would say that improv is a stream of consciousness monologue, whereas writing is completely contrived and exhausting and tedious. And you can have an idea about
Daniel is coming to the end of finishing a book. That's why his response is that.
Yeah, I'm in a really good place. My book is with Simon & Schuster in June this year. So check it out.
Yay!
That's, I think, the main difference. I think with writing, much like improv, and perhaps this is one commonality, the punchline. I write funny, a series of comic essays. The punchline, and the irony or the contradiction, right? That's the whole thing with comedy, is it's the element of surprise, something that doesn't make sense, like someone who was run over by an ambulance, or that absurdity is what makes something. So I know there's something funny, wrong, absurd about a story that I'm writing, much in the same way that I have this character who I want to play, this person is not aware of how ridiculous they are on the stage. They don't know what's wrong with them, even though it's obvious to everyone else. That's the same thing. But I go with the flow with improv, and I don't so much with writing. I don't so much.
Another difference, though, I can see is that in writing, there are singular audiences. It's one pair of eyes that are reading your work, whether it's on the internet or in a book or whatever. On stage, it's a plural audience and a physical stage. What does a stage do to creativity, do you think? The sense of being on a stage and performing in front of a group.
Well, I'm not sure that they're so different. I think both amplify you, but like a microphone amplifies a voice. An audience is very particular, and you get the response in real time. If everyone's drunk and, from a particular suburb, then you're probably not going to be, reciting Shakespeare. Yeah. But I'm sure even then, it has to be smart, it has to be funny, and it has to be real. And that's what I think good improv is about. And with improv, they say don't go big. Be as honest and close to the bone as possible. That's what makes something funny, which is surprising. If you want to, tell a story about space Avengers, let's say space, aliens or something like that, you actually need to tell a story about a father and a son who don't really see eye to eye. They never got along. And Dad, don't you love me? And I love you as you are, but I wish you could be what I want it to be. And then from there, you can get a really funny, absurd scene. And I think that's the same thing with writing. You have to be honest, and people can pick when you're being phony. Children have this capacity to tell when you're being phony. And so if it's a performance, that also comes through on the page. And I've had good critics say to me, what is this? And I thought it was, really a beautifully poetic piece of work, fake, phony, not good. And I think that's the same thing. I think they're more similar than people maybe expect. They're similar.
In terms of eye of the beholder.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Gabi Cadenhead, you, from my understanding of your life, have been a creative person for quite a while. I mean, first in music, would that be accurate? First in flute?
Loudest.
Well, let's see. I think I've always had multiple creative outlets. I think actually writing is first.
Okay.
I think I've been writing stories as long as I've been reading them.
Right.
Like there was one time I went back to like my old notebooks from when I was like 6 years old, and it was like writing about this imaginary friend that I'd invented. And then like at 11, I remember a moment of deciding I'm going to be a published author one day. And I'd started music by then, but it wasn't until like late high school that I was like, I want this to be my career too.
Okay.
So yeah, they've kind of two streams that overlap, I suppose.
But then as well, over the last couple of years, I've seen you move from a creative that kind of writes and maybe, publish stuff to actually performing some of your stuff. You've done some poetry on stage, you've done some music on stage with Marion Street. How has that change been for you to move from simply creating to actually performing?
So I've been performing music for as long as I've been playing instruments, but performing without an instrument is still very scary.
Why?
Because I like hiding behind an instrument.
Sure. Yeah.
Like speaking in front of people like this, if I hadn't been performing poetry for the past few years, I would not be talking here right now. I would not have gotten into the pulpit and preached. I think there's something about the way that music is practiced and honed in my own space and time, that own separate space, and then I can bring that to a stage and know exactly what I'm doing. And if you haven't noticed, my poetry and my sermons, they're all written in advance. That being said, though, I feel like improvising does have a role in my process. I just don't let people into it often. I did do some like improvising subjects at the con, so like with my flute, like it was like throw a bunch of musos together and see what the heck happens. And that was good to like push me out of my comfort zone. And I think improv very much is involved in my early stages of creating a piece of music. But I like that no one else can hear it yet.
So then what's it like to bring something that you've created to the stage?
Fun.
It's generally fun?
Especially when it involves other people.
Okay.
One of the things that fuels me most in life is making music with other people. There's a real community aspect to it. For example, I just finished writing a commission, which I don't get to do very often, for a choir based in Melbourne. And I've kind of like put it all on the paper and it's ready to go nearly. And I haven't yet heard the choir sing it, but I'm like so excited to like be part of their rehearsal process and hear what bits of the text mean to them and how they want to convey that and how they sing it. And I have written music just for me, but that's not my favorite thing.
Sure.
It's usually I know that I have access to this musician, so I'll write something for me. But I really enjoy the ensemble stuff.
What about performing poetry? Does that change your relationship to what you've written when you perform it?
Yes. Because I think for quite a while I'm slowly working on a poetry collection, but there's no publisher involved like Daniel's got. And so for a while, for writing the first half or so of it, it was just me in my house writing poems. And then I started to go into like open mics and slams. And I kind of, a lot of my poetry is about the intersection of queerness and faith, which I know that this community is interested in, but I'm not sure that anyone else is. So for a little while I was like, am I writing a book just for my church? And so to like step out into the like open mic and slam space was really like a testing of the waters in some ways. And I would often like lead with my queerness rather than my faith.
Faith stuff, sure.
But once I'd like sussed out a space a bit, I did win a slam in 2023.
Nice work.
With a poem about being a queer person of faith.
Okay.
About like the kind of the core line of it is I knew God was non-binary long before I knew I was. And so like to have people receive that, and at slams especially, the clicking is instant feedback.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, that line hit.
Yeah.
And some of the others didn't.
Yeah, okay.
And it kind of gives me a sense of like what resonates with people and what could maybe be refined more. But also like I feel like I'm building community around this story. Poetry, I think, more than music is deeply personal because I'm telling my own story.
Yeah.
But to share that in community and have people go, oh, like I'm not religious anymore, but I'm a queer person and I grew up in religion and it's really healing to hear your poem about this. Or like just, Christianity so much in the culture of how we live, and so people have different relationships with it and they just really valued my perspective. And I was like, oh, I don't have to hide different parts of who I am. Yeah.
The instant feedback thing with a slam or stand-up comedy or whatever, even kind of preaching, again is a little bit different to potentially writing, and people will read it, but you may not get that instant what they feel about it necessarily.
In the process, yes, but I feel like a good writer is conscious that there is an audience reading. And it's interesting to me that you said, if I could just...
Yeah, go.
Was it that you said you don't want to write for yourself so much? Or perhaps that you rarely write just for yourself? It was more that as a poet, you want, or music rather, you don't write it for yourself, you write it for others?
You build community and...
Well...
Bit of column A, bit of column B?
I don't know if that's how I would phrase it.
Yeah.
And yet here we are.
Sorry, you say whatever point you were trying to
I
make.
I just think an audience is important, and I think that even if you write by yourself, you need to think about how this will be received.
Yeah. Oh
And
yeah, I definitely think about that with music in terms of like, you know, the training that I got at the con was very much leaning into experimental music stuff, and I have those tools in my toolbox, but I don't create like experimental music for the sake of creating experimental music. It's usually like something that feels a little bit familiar and unfamiliar, so that there's some experimental element, but not enough to alienate an audience, so that they can kind of be eased into it.
Yeah. And I think that is, for me, the difference between writing something for publication and just say writing my journal.
Sure.
You know, is that writing for myself can be therapeutic and cathartic and just help me process things. Writing for a reader is not like that. It's confined to a format, to a template. You know, with a beginning, a middle, and end, and a problem that needs to be solved. So it's not as enjoyable necessarily as a process.
I have a very different process.
Do you?
Yeah.
I'd like to hear about it.
I think stream of consciousness is more involved. I think with poetry, like if I was writing like prose stories, it would be different. But with poetry, it very much starts as like a stream of consciousness, speed writing, just word vomit.
Yeah.
And then I go back and go, okay, what were the 2 lines that were actually decent, and can I make them into a poem? And so I've gotten really practiced at separating creative process and critical process. And so this is all that a first draft has to do is exist, and then I can get my editing brain on and craft it into something.
Sure.
But first there's that stream of consciousness. Something has to be on the page before I can craft it into something. Yeah. Anyway, I feel like Scott hasn't talked
Scott,
yet.
I'm just listening.
weave in your experiences, particularly with theatre on stage, with what you've heard from Gabi and from Daniel. Has performing always been part of your life?
Yeah, I think I would say so. I think I was just an innately creative kid. You know, I feel like, you know, my daughter is very similar. I kind of see a lot of elements of that. But like, if I think about the first creative stuff I was doing, I literally had a little journal and I designed theme park rides, you know, and like that was kind of, and I feel like that's where my practice has kind of sat. Is like, essentially anything I'm doing, I'm designing a theme park ride for somebody. And, you know, I think literally my journals go with me everywhere. That's the starting place for any of my work. And a lot of it is stream of consciousness. Like I'm just blurting stuff onto a page. You know, like for the recent show I did, Hillsong Boy, like there was, you know, probably, I think I calculated about 40 to 50,000 words of stuff that just did not make it into the show. It was literally just me writing. And I presented all of that to somebody because equally, I think you need to have something land on an audience to know whether or not it works. And that's why I always work collaboratively, because I guess I don't really trust my own judgment, especially about personal stuff, right? So, you know, I have a fabulous collaborator who I was able to bring stuff to. I also bring stuff to my partner, Kat, over there, who is very honest with me about the work, which is nice. You know, and that kind of helps sift the wheat from the chaff in some ways.
Nice, very biblical. Well done.
That's what we're here for.
Thinking specifically about, if you're okay with it, thinking about Hillsong Boy, what does the physical act of performing do to you? Not for others. What does it do to you?
What does it do to me?
Yeah.
I think it depends where in the process you're talking about.
All right.
So during the creative development process, it's very stressful on my body.
Okay.
I find it very draining and taxing. Opening night is a rush and an absolute blur, especially for the last season of Hillsong Boy, where I was very ill and got, you know, basically pumped with drugs and shoved out onto stage because we couldn't cancel the first show.
Yeah.
But like, as the season progresses and it starts to sit in your body, it's actually it's a place of flow, I would say. So it's sort of a journey And also within the creative process, there's that journey as well, right? Because you start, and when you're just blurting stuff onto a page, it's wonderful. It feels very liberating. You're just like, it's stuff on a page. It doesn't matter. There's no consequence, no audience for this. It's great. And then all of a sudden you have to start filtering it, and the brain sort of sets in and goes, no, this is terrible.
Yeah.
I don't have anything here. What am I going to do? The clock is ticking. This has to be in front of an audience in 6 months.
Yeah.
And then at that point you start panicking, and then you sit back into the flow because all of a sudden you start getting a structure, and then you have to put it in front of an audience, and that's terrifying. But it's a roller coaster. That's my metaphor today. I'm just rolling with it. But yeah, like it's a roller coaster. You go through a lot. And if we're talking self-care, I think that there's a lot to be said about how to manage that, because I'm sure the creatives are not the only people that have a roller coaster of emotion and stress associated with their work, you know?
Of course. Yeah.
I think it's very easy for me to, these days, I've been through it so many times now, I know where on the roller coaster I am.
Yeah.
So I can kind of sit back and go, oh yes, this is the part where I panic for my life and I want to quit, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Same question for you both. What does performing do to you?
You start.
Oh, I was about to tell you to. What does performing do to me? Well, I perform in like 4 different ways. There's poetry, there's flute, there's piano, there's singing. The using my voice is always scarier than the others. Singing is something I've only newly done in public, and it feels very different in my body to every other kind of performing. But also poetry felt like that when I first started doing it. What does it do? I suppose it allows me to embody what I've created. But I think I don't think I'm someone who performs to perform. I'm performing because I want to share something that I've made.
Okay. Yep.
I will rarely be bothered to learn someone else's music these days. It's mostly about I've made something and I want to share it with the world.
Okay.
But when it's something deeply personal, like a poem, I think it's actually pretty powerful in terms of showing me that my voice deserves to be heard.
Love that. Yep.
Because, the first few open mics that I went to, I still wasn't sure if it was. And I think I'm someone who's always craved to be heard, but not known whether anyone was listening.
And on stage, people are listening, right?
Yeah, well, they have to.
Lock the doors.
But to, say, here's something deeply personal that I've been wrestling with to the point where I've written a poem about it. Here you go. And to have them then turn around and say, that was meaningful to me because, or you've got something particular to offer this space that we value, or has shown me that my story is important not just to me.
Love that. I'm trying to think of a better word than affirming. It is affirming to you to perform, but that's not the right word.
Empowering?
Validating, yeah.
Just I think that there's a performing poetry version of me.
Right.
That feels different to every other version of me.
Yeah.
And it's the version that steps forward and says, I'm going to talk about this part of me that maybe there isn't a socially acceptable conversation to have about it, but I'm going to frame it in this way that I feel can only be conveyed through poetry rather than literal sentences. And then to have people go, oh, and I heard this in that line from my experience that I didn't put there, but they heard.
Yep. That's
yeah,
cool.
it's kind of it's both an embodying of something that I've created and a letting go of what it means, so that other people can make
'Cause it's kind of out of your
meaning
control, right?
from my
Yeah.
words. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Daniel, what does it do to you, but also how does it affect your discipleship?
I love performing. I'm a real show pony, as you may have noticed. And I love the thrill of performing. I love nothing more than writing something that I'm, confident in and then reading it off a page. There's no element of risk. If they don't enjoy it, it's their fault. and and that's different to other more, improvised or spontaneous art forms. I imagine it's similar in a way to a play that you've written, to a piece of music that you've crafted. You know the parameters of it. You can go with it. And then you have that beautiful moment of flight, I love that. As for my discipleship, I think when I am, honest with myself that this is who I am, I like to perform, I like to be seen, and that this is not a thing to be ashamed of. As some conservative, I think, communities and families where maybe you're told to be quiet might have you believe, then I can really, I guess it becomes a kind of act of worship. And it becomes a kind of a praise, an act of devotion, an act of praise. I always also try, if I'm going, it's particularly the case if I'm writing something that I know has some kind of social justice value.
Sure.
But maybe even if I'm writing an essay about how, like my first awkward sexual encounter, God is everywhere. So,
Yeah. The be quiet mindset, is that, do you read that as performing arts is egotistical and ego is bad? So is that where it comes from?
Yes.
So how have you unlearnt that as a mindset, if that was something you grew up with?
I think you have to believe you have something to say and that you are entitled to say it.
Sure.
And that you'll say it better, or at least different, to the way that anyone else will say it.
Okay.
It's your experience,
Okay. Yeah. Scott, how has performing, or how did your recent experience of performing affect your sense of who God is or your relationship with, or who you are?
Yeah. I mean, it's a hard one for me because I think I've always been on stage. So my understanding of God and the stage, they've never been separate things because I've just always it's just kind of who I am.
Okay.
I think there's something about the communal nature of theatre which I keep coming back to, and the reason that it should continue as an art form because I think as history progresses and new art forms emerge and new forms of technology supersede old forms of technology, and at the moment the death of cinema is like a particular prescient one. Like what happens, how do we understand these art forms as the world changes? And to me, I go, like, at one stage there was no cinema, there was just theatre, and then cinema came in and theatre was like relegated to this kind of archaic art form that we still do to this day, and people are always questioning, why are we doing theatre? I guess I just think it's the communal nature of it. It's we sit together in the same space, experience the same thing for a moment. It only exists then and there in that moment, and then it's gone. You can film my performance, but it's not the same. And I think that's why I am interested in experience. Again, to come back to the theme park ride, it's the experience that we all have together, shared, sitting in the roller coaster together, going up and down the hills. And I think cinema is going to have to rediscover that as well, because now cinema is becoming the shared experience. And I think some of my favorite moments in cinema are sitting in it. Like when I was in LA, I went to the cinema that was owned by what's his name, the director that I can't remember, that you don't care about. But they did like 3 back-to-back movies, and in between somebody had come out and they did like a raffle and they did like all sorts of stuff. And it was really fun. It's my favorite experience of cinema. I never experienced cinema as a communal form, and I just think oh, you know, in the advent of, we've had streaming now for 20 years, but like, as cinema continues to see decreasing sales, maybe that's where it needs to go as well. And I think it's art kind of finding its communal heritage, you know, as a non-individualized form where we are just as individuals doing art or experiencing art. Actually, we're here together and we're sharing that experience and we're getting that feedback from the audience and we're hearing how it touched them or how the experience affected them, which is just, you know, like I love reading reviews, even the bad ones, you know, because it's like, oh, somebody's had a response to my work.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I'm aware of time, so I have one last question and then we're going to move into some table group discussion. Say someone here is thinking about some form of performing arts to integrate into their lives as a self-care practice. One sentence, word of advice or any thoughts for people who might be thinking about that. We'll start with Dan.
Okay. Despite what I've said about the process is tedious and this is, you know, a lofty calling, you know, you have to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be moved, and the thing that moves you is the avenue to follow, right? So if something, whatever makes you laugh will make you funny. Whatever makes you cry will make you poignant, you know? Whatever makes you angry will make you compelling. So go with that thing. Whether it's a piece of visual art, whether it's poetry that stays with you. And for what it's worth, I think the Bible as a piece of literature is, there's a reason that this book has been the most reprinted collection of works in history, right? So this too is a literary experience, a literary enterprise. And for me, that's that beautiful line between creativity and mysticism. That's a very fine line.
Sure.
And you don't always know where you are on that spectrum, you know, where it's you making something up or whether it's God talking through you. And that's thrilling. That's really exciting. So if we can cultivate a sense of wonder, we'll be healthier, we'll be happier, we'll be better. Just to not just pleasure or really great meal, although that can be a spiritual experience too. But yeah, a sense of wonder. Let's try and find that sense of wonder and sit with it for a while. And don't be afraid to try to write something out, or you have to put something on the page first. So don't be afraid to do that.
Gabi?
We are all beings created in the image of a creator. I believe that every human is creative. It's not this binary of some people have this gift and some people don't. It's something we can all access. I have peer pressured Christina so much that I've become an intrusive thought, because the amount of times she'd say to me, like, she's like, come to my gigs and people are like, and what do you do? And she's like, oh, I'm not creative.
No.
Now I'm an intrusive thought in her brain that tells her that she is. So I feel like that's an achievement. If I can become an intrusive thought for everyone else, that would be great. I think the schools, particularly the HSC system, often kind of grinds the creativity out of us and it feels inaccessible, but I hope to remind you that it is, whether it's, most of us have the privilege of being literate, so language is there for you to access. And just that don't be afraid of the starting.
Yeah.
And don't let the judgment come in yet.
Starting's
That's for later.
overrated. Just do it.
Just do it. Scott?
So Brian Eno has this quote that is, art is anything that we don't have to do. It's frivolous by its nature. It's not productive. And I think we often get caught in a cycle of productivity because there's so many things to do,
Right.
And especially, I'm a parent of two. There are lots to do. It never ends. But I think just trying to find space to do things that don't produce anything, whether that's, to cook something nice and to just, you know, buy that extra ingredient and try a different ingredient I've never tried before for an experience for somebody else, or to, you know, I don't know, when I'm doing my shelving units at home, to like not just pick IKEA and like to come up with another idea and just put a little bit more effort into that. And I think, you know, because we're all so slammed, we're all so busy, like the idea that, oh, you know, any of us are just going to pick up an easel and paint a thing or go and write something, you know, that's a lot of energy. But I think just understanding that creativity and art is expressed in the things that we don't have to do. You know, getting a different haircut or something, you know, like doing some gardening, right? Like, I just think, you know, there's gardening that you have to do, mow the lawns. There's gardening you don't have to do, planting some nice plants. I don't know, I don't garden. I live in an apartment. Whatever you gardening
Join us in
people
2 weeks' time when we'll talk more about it. Go on.
But yeah, that's kind of my feeling about it, because I think often the pressure is there as well. Like, I should be more creative. I should be doing more creative stuff. I mean, I even feel that, right? I should be being more creative. And it's like, just find space to do just something that you don't have to do.
You don't have to do.
You know? I don't know if that's what Brian Eno meant, but that's how I interpret it.
Okay.
Yeah.